Next on Link TV, Latin polls, news and analysis from Latin America as seen by Latin American media, followed by a panel discussion on the issues. Next on Latin polls, only on Link TV.
The following program is an original production of Link TV.
The November election for President of the United States is fast approaching. With the race so tight, the three leading candidates are going after what may be the tiebreaker, the Latino vote. That group may determine who moves into the White House next winter. Will this translate into true political strength or remain just another political promise? This and more coming up next on Latin Polls. Hello and welcome to Pulso Latino. I'm your host, Ena Cuevas. Our topic tonight, the upcoming U.S. presidential election and the importance of the Latino vote in the United States.
Sí se puede.
The Latino vote used to be taken for granted, but today it's no longer a guarantee. Some say this change in voting practices could tip the scale either way, as we see in the following report from Colombia's RCN.
Los demócratas quieren ganar la carrera y recuperar la Casa Blanca, pero dentro de la colectividad se libra otro apasionante duelo para obtener la candidatura oficial del partido a las elecciones presidenciales. Barack Obama quiere ser el primer afroamericano en llegar al Salón Oval. Hillary Clinton quiere ser la primera mujer en gobernar Estados Unidos. Las últimas encuestas muestran un empate técnico en las votaciones del supermartes. Los dos candidatos visitaron en una semana los 24 estados en los que hoy se abrieron las urnas y enviaron mensajes a los electores de habla hispana. La ex primera dama envió un artículo a varios medios latinos. Dijo que es hora de recuperar la confianza entre su país y Latinoamérica y que la demagogia y el populismo son los verdaderos enemigos de estas naciones. Obama incluso llamó a una emisora latina en Los Ángeles y cantó en español.
México, lindo y querido.
Para varios analistas, los demócratas volverán al poder, pero hoy no se conocerá el candidato oficial del partido.
People in Mexico are following the U.S. election very closely. Some venture to say that the elections in the United States are so important to Mexico that Mexicans should be allowed to vote in them. Here is that story from Mexico's Once Noticias.
La reñida contienda por la candidatura del Partido Demócrata entre el senador por Illinois, Barack Obama, y la senadora por Nueva York, Hillary Clinton, ha generado en México un inusitado interés en la elección presidencial de Estados Unidos.
Otro amigo me comentaba, oye, es que Ana María, todos los mexicanos deberíamos de tener el derecho de votar en las elecciones de Estados Unidos porque el futuro presidente de los Estados Unidos nos afecta a todos. Nos afecta mucho en México las percepciones que esa persona vaya a tener, las políticas públicas que vayan a tomar y la prioridad que le dé el nuevo presidente o la nueva presidenta a la relación bilateral.
En México, la opinión pública está atenta a las propuestas en materia de migración de los precandidatos demócratas. Poco a poco, los mexicanos han comenzado a advertir que las elecciones en Estados Unidos no les resultan ajenas. La lucha por el poder en el vecino país del norte se está consolidando como un elemento más de la cultura política del mexicano.
John McCain, the Republican virtual nominee, says he favors improved relations between the U.S. and Latin America. He says Latin America is becoming increasingly important to the United States. McCain also says that U.S.-Latin American relations should be based on mutual respect, as we see in the following report from U.S. broadcaster Latinoamérica.
McCain informó que su país debe conducirse como un ciudadano ejemplar para mejorar sus vínculos con la comunidad internacional. Aun cuando defendió la guerra en Irak, el candidato republicano expuso claras diferencias con el presidente George Bush sobre la prisión de Guantánamo y las torturas y el trato inhumano de esos detenidos. América Latina es cada vez más vital para Estados Unidos, destacó el senador, y dijo que las relaciones deben estar marcadas por el respeto mutuo y un diálogo más fluido, lejos de una confrontación entre un impulso imperialista o una demagogia antiestadounidense.
In Spain, as in most of the world, the media are fascinated by the electoral process in the United States. This can be seen in the following report from Spanish broadcaster Televisión Española. They look at the Hollywood connection in the battle between the Democratic candidates.
En Estados Unidos, la batalla por la candidatura demócrata a la Casa Blanca ha adquirido tintes cinematográficos con la irrupción en campaña de Jack Nicholson. El oscarizado actor ha puesto alguno de los mejores momentos de su carrera al servicio de Hillary Clinton. Frases lapidarias del Joker de Batman o el Jack Torrance del Resplandor que sirven para responder a cuestiones en juego en estas primarias, como quién está más preparado para el cargo u ofrece un mejor plan de salud. El toque cómico lo pone al final del vídeo el coronel Nathan de Algunos Hombres Buenos. Los partidarios de Obama no han tardado en neutralizar el efecto del vídeo parodiándolo. Ellos muestran a un Nicholson perplejo y desquiciado ante el empuje del afroamericano que acaba renegando de Clinton y de la mujer en general.
It's been years since the U.S. has seen such a tight race for a presidential nomination. The Democratic candidates, Senators Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, are technically tied, so every vote is critical. Recently, both candidates courted the Hispanic community prior to the Texas primary. They were trying to get the support of Latinos in that state. Republican candidate John McCain also campaigned in Texas, but as U.S. broadcaster Univision reports, Latinos, at least in that state, are mainly behind Hillary Clinton.
Una consulta sobre el voto hispano tejano realizada el fin de semana por New Link Research reveló que si las elecciones generales tuvieran lugar hoy entre Barack Obama y John McCain, Obama obtendría el 44% de los votos y McCain el 40%. Pero si los candidatos fueran Hillary Clinton y John McCain, la senadora de Nueva York obtendría una sorprendente preferencia del 73% y McCain solo contaría con el 16%.
Lo que el presidente Bush había logrado entre el 2000 y el 2004 parece haberse erosionado. El votante hispano ha vuelto al Partido Demócrata.
In our studios to talk about the Latino vote in the United States, we have Andrés Jiménez from the California Policy Research Center at UC Berkeley, and David Campos, an immigrant from Guatemala who is an elected member of the San Francisco Democratic County Central Committee. And from Washington, D.C., we are joined by Mark Hugo Lopez, Associate Director at the Pew Hispanic Center, and Dani Vargas, Chair of the Republican National Hispanic Assembly. First of all, welcome all of you to Latin Pulse, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Latino population, there are large numbers, but actually there's not a lot of them who vote. 2 out of 3 are either too young or not U.S. citizens. Mr. Vargas, who has more to gain from the Latino vote, the Democrats or the Republicans?
Well, I think the Republicans have some room to be able to make up from some of the losses that we had in 2006, but I think generally, bottom line, most of the values that are associated with Hispanic voters are very similar to the values that the Republican Party espouses. So our challenge is to make sure that we do a better job of communicating that to the Hispanic voting public so that they understand that there is a difference, that there is a choice.
Why has the Democratic Party taken the Latino vote for granted? And this is to you, Mr. Campos. Why do you think they've taken it for granted? And what has happened in the last few years that now it's not a guarantee?
Well, I don't know that the Democratic Party has taken that vote for granted. I think that more emphasis needs to be given to the Hispanic community. But quite frankly, what we see from the Republican Party, I think, provides an opportunity for the Democratic Party because there is anti-immigrant rhetoric that's coming from the Republicans that I think is pushing a lot of Latinos to the Democratic Party. So I actually think that it is the Democratic Party that will ultimately gain from what's going on. You know, you turn on the TV and you have Republicans saying things that are very offensive to the Latino community. And so I think it's really an opportunity for the Democratic Party to reach out to those voters. And I think we'll see the results of that in November.
But why do you think there has been a shift? Does it have anything to do with the latest efforts with immigration reform?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Latinos expected immigration reform to happen. You had a Democratic Congress that was prepared to do that. You had a Republican president that was willing to do it, but it was the Republican Congress and the right wing of the Republican Party that kept that from happening. And so now it's up to the Democratic Party to say to the Latino community, we are the party that is going to represent your interests, that is best poised to be your advocate in Washington, D.C. And that's why I think a lot of Latinos are going to be registering as Democrats.
Mr. Jimenez, which of the 3 candidates do you think, when it comes to foreign policy in Latin America specifically, which of the 3 candidates do you think will strengthen the relationship between the U.S. and Latin America?
Well, I think we've entered a very interesting period because, in fact, we've had somewhat of a estrangement happened between the U.S. foreign policy establishment and Latin America in the last 8 years. And even during the previous 8 years, there weren't the type of close relationships that many Latin American leaders would have liked to have seen. I think all three of the candidates in some way offer a closer relationship to Latin America, but in very different ways. I think probably the most major change would be an Obama administration. I think what we might see with John McCain is something along the lines of a more kind of moderate Democrat or moderate Republican approach, which is an understanding and engagement with Latin America and more of an opening than we've seen in the last 8 years, but still some very firm kind of ideological positions relative to the governments such as Venezuela and Cuba, for example. Hillary Clinton might be a little bit closer to John McCain than some might believe because of her own approaches being very similar to those, in fact, of McCain and her own husband's administration. I think Barack Obama might be a little bit more open to a conversation of a new negotiation between the United States and Latin America, given what he said and who his policy advisors are.
Mr. Lopez, Latinos aren't only concerned about immigration. What are the other topics that you see that Latinos are interested in and are concerned about in this election?
Well, every indication that we've had from the primaries to date suggests that Latino voters, I should say, are actually very concerned about things like the economy and jobs. In fact, that usually ranks as the #1 issue. Second will typically be the war in Iraq or something having to do with the war in Iraq. And third will typically be health care. Of course, there are many issues that Latinos are concerned about. And some of our polling that we have done at the Pew Hispanic Center suggests that, of course, immigration policy and immigration law enforcement are issues that Latinos are concerned with as well. But everything we've seen more recently suggests that the economy and jobs is #1.
With the immigration, does that have to do with the links that Latinos tend to maintain with their relatives and with their home country?
Partly has to do with that. It partly has to do with enforcement of immigration laws at the local level. So in some of the questions that we had asked in the fall of last year of Latinos, we found that a significant number, over half in fact, fear deportation of either themselves, somebody they know, a co-worker, family member, cousin, etc. And that's a pretty high number, suggesting that there's a lot of concern about what's happening with regards to immigration law enforcement, and even with regards to specific policies such as workplace raids. We have found that a lot of Latinos are not in favor of those policies.
How is Latin America, the Latin American media, following this election? How closely are they keeping an eye on it?
I think quite closely. In fact, in my own office, I've received queries from the Mexican press, from the Venezuelan press, and from some of the Central American countries. I think we can distinguish between Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean on the one hand, which have keen interest given immigration and economic ties to the United States and proximity, and South America. And we've known that as a result of shifts in economic and political power, as well as governments in Latin America in general, that there's a sense that there's an interest in creating a new relationship to the major economic powers, whether they be in Europe or Asia or the United States. And I think in a sense there's been a growing estrangement happening, particularly on the economic side, between the United States and Latin America. So there's great interest in seeing whether there's going to be a different type of approach in U.S. foreign policy with the forthcoming administration. And because of that reason, there's a lot of attention to this campaign.
Mr. Vargas, knowing that immigration is such a hot issue and that all three candidates have different viewpoints on that, what do you believe is going to be the advantage, let's say in the case of Senator John McCain, in order to try and attract that Latino vote, which is considered to be kind of the tiebreaker and will most likely make the difference?
Sure, no, and I agree. I think the Hispanic vote will be pivotal, will be crucial, especially in a number of the southwestern states and some of the states in like Florida and New Jersey and so forth. But I think we have a great opportunity with Senator McCain to be able to have someone who has been a leader on this issue as well as many other issues that the Hispanic voting population is concerned with. We know that Senator McCain, along with President Bush, were at the forefront of trying to create an immigration reform package that actually took all of the issues into account, not just illegal immigration, but also the factors related to the economy and national security. So I think the Hispanic voting community understands that John McCain is someone that is a leader, that's someone that they can trust on this and many other important issues. But let's not lose sight of the fact that it's not just immigration. As Mark just said, it's issues associated with the economy, associated with jobs, small business, healthcare, education, as well as values. So these are all issues that I think Senator McCain has a great opportunity to be able to reach out to Hispanic voters, and he's got tons of experience. He's an American hero. As we compare him to the other candidates on the Democratic side, we see that Senator Obama may be an eloquent speaker and a very charismatic figure, but he has virtually no experience when it comes to national issues. And Senator Clinton, frankly, has made it very clear that one of her mainstays is to make sure that the government has even more control and more ability to have an impact on daily lives. And I think right now Hispanic voters understand that we can't have ever-increasing government involvement and ever-increasing taxes, and I think that's what they understand that they'll get with Senator Clinton.
So basically the candidates can't just focus on the immigration issues, Mr. Campos?
What I would say is actually, with respect to immigration, it could be that Mr. McCain does want to see immigration reform, but he is running for George Bush's third term. And what we have seen in the last 2 terms is that even though the president has been willing to push for reform, the right wing of the party has not allowed him to do that. And that's the challenge that John McCain is going to have. And the fact is that he has tried to cater to the right wing. We have seen that on some issues where he has tried to move to the right. So I'm not convinced that he is actually going to be the one to deliver real immigration reform. And in fact, on the other issues, I think that the Democratic Party is the one that's talking in ways that's actually resonating with voters. You know, with respect to Iraq, which is a very important issue. It's John McCain who said that we could, conceivably be in Iraq for 100 years. That's not a message that is a positive message in the Latino community. The Latino community wants the government to focus on the issues that are affecting them internally. The economy is a big issue. McCain has already said he's not really knowledgeable, at least doesn't have the expertise on economic issues. And that's where the Democratic candidates, Obama, Clinton, are going to have an advantage. And I think that Obama, in particular, when it comes to Latin America, brings an international perspective that gives people a lot of hope. It's the same kind of hope that people had when Bush was elected, thinking, he's from Texas, maybe he will understand our community better. I think that Obama represents that to many people. He comes from an international perspective. His dad is from Africa. He lived in Indonesia. I think that that's a very positive thing for Latin Americans.
And Mr. Vargas, but something must be resonating with the voters that a lot of them are switching their alliances from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. How would you explain that?
Well, and I think there's still a lot of territory to cover. There's an eternity between April and November in terms of electoral politics. So those of us that care about making sure that voters understand what the real issues are, what the real positions are of the different candidates, what the real differences are, it's part of our job to make sure that we're communicating that with the public. And I think they'll see, in the case of Senator Obama, for example, he's the one that's stood firmly against creating a free trade agreement with Colombia, which most of us agree is something that's going to be important, not just for the United States, but also for the people in Colombia, trying to bolster some of the reforms that are taking place in Colombia and thwart some of the threats that are coming from some of the more extreme, radical leftist elements in Latin America. We also know that he's taken a stand against being able to make sure that we keep Chavez in Venezuela and Castro in Cuba from increasing their influence in the region. So we see that that there are differences that we need to help point out to the voting population.
Well, one thing along these lines I'd like to say is it's interesting to see the percentage of Latino voters, many of whom are registered independents, who voted in the Democratic primaries in Texas and California. We saw that about 30% of the electorate in California and 33% of the electorate in the Democratic primary in Texas were Latinos, and there was significant participation also in Arizona and Colorado. So what I think that says in part is that there's a lot of interest in this election by the Latino community, and that's going to be reflected in November.
Mr. Lopez, California, Texas, and Florida are key states, and they also have some of the largest Latino populations. However, they're not all the same. What are some of the differences? Because you can't lump the group into just one full category.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly California has the single largest Latino population of any state in the country. In fact, almost about a third of all Latinos in the United States reside in California. That's pretty big. Texas, of course, is also very large. Texas, though, its Latino population, while it has a significant immigrant population, it's actually somewhat less likely to be foreign-born than, say, California or Florida. And Florida, of course, has the dynamics of a large Cuban community and a large Puerto Rican community, so that there's a sort of a different dynamic in terms of ethnicity and also recentness of immigration than you see in California or Texas. But in following up, yes, we've actually seen in just about every state in the nation that's held a primary so far that in the Democratic primaries, just about every state, the share of voters who are Latino has actually risen. The other interesting thing about this is in just about every state, we've also seen a surge in participation. So this not only suggests that Latinos are coming out and representing a larger share of voters in those races, but they're also representing just a larger number of people actually coming out and voting. So much so that they've actually changed the composition of voters on Election Day relative to 2004.
If I may add that I think that what's happened is that because of the discussions around immigration, a lot of people are actually coming forward and naturalizing at higher rates. In my own personal experience, my parents, who at some point swore they would never become U.S. citizens, are naturalizing because they're afraid of what's going to happen. They really fear that the country is going to go down the direction that becomes more anti-immigrant, and because of that, they want to become citizens and vote in this election. So I think that's a very positive development that we're seeing.
And also perhaps an awareness that the election is so close. You know, right now we have 3, but we'll have 2, and it's so close, and the votes will make a difference.
Well, I think people understand that there is a difference if you have a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. And I think that that's why the Republican Party, I think, is going to have some difficult times, because the Democrats are the ones who are reaching out to the immigrant communities, and those are the communities that I think are going to make the difference in November.
Mr. Jimenez, as far as Latin America, how is the electoral process viewed? Do you think that it's lost a lot of its sheen? I know a lot of Latin American countries follow it as closely as their own elections.
That's right. Well, I think, and it's also interesting to note that there are a number of newspapers in Mexico where I follow the news closely that have separate sections solely on the U.S. elections, so there's a lot of interest. However, part of the problem sometimes is that there's somewhat of a misunderstanding of how the electoral college system works, or how the party system works, or how the primary system works, because it's a very unique type of system that's not very well understood in many Latin American countries. People tend to see elections through the optic of their own countries. And of course, in Mexico, we have this very interesting political transition, and in fact, some of the parties are going through kind of a decomposition right now, so there's a lot of concern, national concern, but I think there's more concern about there's more interest in the individual candidates. They see, of course, the prospect of a woman president or an African-American president being something unique, and something they don't fully understand how they're able to obtain the level of support they have to this point. So there's great interest, particularly in terms of the personalities and the positions that are being espoused by the personalities.
Because actually, we just watched a Mexican political analyst, tongue-in-cheek, say that Mexicans actually should vote in the elections because there's so much at stake for them.
That's right.
You know, of course, it's never going to happen, but do you see any
Well, I
truth
think
in that?
the way that it's happening, in a sense, is the fact that there's such a large diaspora from Mexico, many of whom now are becoming naturalized citizens of the United States. And in some interesting way, the people who were born in Mexico and their children are representing Mexico in the U.S. elections. Right.
So in a way, definitely foreign policy is important.
Absolutely. It blends together, because a lot of foreign policy relates to immigration policy, immigrant integration, visas, border security, and all these things are important, and they affect communities within the United States as well as communities of origin where people are from.
And clearly, the more Latinos in the U.S. are involved, the more the U.S. government will pay attention to Latin America. And that's why Latino involvement in the political process is so critical.
No, but I would add also the fact that, you know, Hispanics are the ultimate swing voters. I mean, typically they will consider themselves independent, and they will vote more for the candidate than for the party. So percentage-wise, while you might have some more that call themselves Democrats, you also have percentage-wise more that consider themselves conservative than liberal as well. So there's a window of opportunity for us as Republicans to be able to get out there and make sure that we communicate with that segment of the voting population and make sure that they understand what the real differences are and what we really stand for as a party in terms of the values that we share with the Hispanic community.
But Mr. Vargas, following what Mr. Campos has said about John McCain serving a third term for George Bush, how does a candidate like John McCain then indicate that the policies towards Latin America will be different, with, you know, even though it is a Republican administration, that the policies would be different, and how would they be?
Well, and the third term of a Bush administration, that's a tagline. That's just talking points. What we're talking about here is really the future of the country. We're talking about a person who has always been his own man, who's always been a leader, someone who has been able to talk straight with the American people. And it's not going to be about pandering, it's not going to be about patronizing, it's about talking about the real big issues that we have to face as a nation. That's the economy, it's national security, and a whole host of issues associated with the real daily lives of Americans. And I think at the end of the day, when we come down to, when people go into the booth on November 4th to cast their vote, they'll cast their vote for someone who they believe can actually lead the country in turbulent times that we're facing right now. And they won't do it based on someone that's only got a couple of years of experience. And frankly, Senator Clinton also has limited experience as well. So I think we have a great opportunity with a great individual candidate to be able to step up and capture a greater percentage of the Hispanic vote than even President Bush did in 2004.
Mr. Lopez, as far as Latin America, we have the situation in Iraq, we have problems in Europe, and of course Latin America ranks kind of low when it comes to foreign policy. What can the candidates do, or what can people in Latin America do in order to try and bring some of the issues to the forefront and realize that it is significant?
Well, we haven't done any real polling on this to sort of figure out sort of what first Latino voters and Latino population generally, how they rank foreign policy issues with regard to Latin America. This is something I think that we want to do some more on, but we haven't done anything on this yet. With regards to how sort of to raise the profile of these issues, clearly candidates, if they want to raise these profiles of these issues, should talk about these particular issues and make them important. Things such as free trade and so forth, of course, would matter. But I think placing them within the context of some of the top issues that Latinos are pointing to already, such as economy and jobs, is probably the way you're going to raise the profile of some of these foreign policy issues.
You know, one thing I wanted to bring up just very briefly, and that is the fact that many Latin American immigrants come from countries, even those countries that are considered more conservative, in which there's a belief that government should play a role in terms of health and education to make investments in society. So I think that even though Latinos may be socially conservative, it's important that they have an understanding, to understand that they have an appreciation for the role of government in society to make things better, particularly for people who are low and moderate income. And I think often it's very easy to use the taglines of conservative and liberal, but I think immigrants are very sophisticated in how they make decisions in terms of government. And I think they're looking to the U.S. government to improve the economic conditions of their communities, to improve the educational conditions of their communities, and it'll be interesting to see who can make that kind of case.
And I think that this election will show just how sophisticated those voters have become. Well, I trust you enjoyed today's program. I'd like to thank our guests here in San Francisco, Andres Jimenez from the California Policy Research Center at UC Berkeley, and David Campos, member of the San Francisco Democratic County Central Committee. And in Washington, D.C., Mark Hugo Lopez, Associate Director at the Pew Hispanic Center, and Danny Vargas, Chair of the Republican National Hispanic Assembly. I also like to thank you at home or on the web for being with us today. We would also like to thank the School of Communication at American University in Washington, D.C. for helping research this program. Join us next time when we take a closer look at Latin America through the eyes of Latin American media. For more information about Pulso Latino and Latin America, log on to linktv.org. I'm Ana Cuevas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on Latin Pulse.
Latin Pulse was made possible by support from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Pulso Latino es posible gracias al apoyo de John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation y el William and Flora Hewlett Foundation.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.